board and sorry about that.
No, that's me. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. And I'm kind of emeritus on the Northridge East Neighborhood Council. Just recently stepped down off the board there and working with a group called the California Donut Economics Coalition, which I'll describe if somebody really wants to hear about it. But that's where I'm kind of involved pretty heavily these days. And let's see, other than that, nice to meet you all.
Great, thank you. Lorraine, can you please go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Lorraine Lundquist. I'm a member of the board and happy to be here tonight.
Great, thank you. And I'll try to see if I can find any other board members. I know Scott is not with us this evening. I see Ernie's E. Ernie, can you please go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I also serve on the NCSA board and look forward to today's meetings and presentations.
Great, thank you. And Muriel, I don't see you. Are you here? Okay. Okay. Well, thank you. Great to see everybody. We have a nice critical mass, so I think I'm gonna dive right in and hand it over to Emily Gable. She is a city planner with LA City Planner, and she and a bunch of folks from city planning are here to talk about the transportation demand management program and ordinance. And I think she'll be talking for a bit, and then we'll open it up to hear from everybody in the meeting what we think about it and what our thoughts are. And I'd also want to make sure we can talk about how neighborhood councils can influence these plans going forward. Okay, Emily, I don't see you, but I'm happy if you.
I'm here.
Wait.
So I'm gonna share my screen, and while I get that set up, I'm gonna let Connie Pellini-Tipton introduce our group.
Yes. Hi. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Wonderful. Great. Great to be here with you this evening, and thank you for having us. As Emily mentioned, she's going to lead the presentation along with Cameron Phillips from our planning department. And we also have David Summers here from LADOT. This is a joint project that we have been working on with DOT, our transportation department for the city of Los Angeles, for the last several years. My name is Connie Pellini-Tipton. I'm a senior city planner with the Department of City Planning. I oversee citywide policy, which my team is part of the policy team. And we are bringing you the Transportation Demand Management Ordinance. This is an update to an existing ordinance that has been in place since the early 1990s. So this is an ordinance that requires new development to meet certain requirements, and it only applies to really large new developments today. It applies to commercial and industrial development, and we're bringing an update to this ordinance that expands its applicability to new development. So the team's going to explain the details of that today, but we wanted to bring it to this group in particular because of your interest in sustainability. The reason we really see this as improving the city's sustainability is really because it's a mobility ordinance. It's an implementation of our general plan mobility element that is part of the city's general plan. And I think many of you know that document helps guide the city's growth and how it changes over time. And so since the early 80s, 90s, we've been looking at different ways to get people out of their car and out of traffic. And so it's really been the right time to look at this ordinance and make some improvements since many state laws have changed, trying to get, again, people out of their cars and giving Angelenos more options for getting around, whether that's through transit or pedestrian safety or really bicycling, and just reducing overall vehicle usage. So this ordinance proposes new strategies for new development to take advantage of. And so I'd like to hand it over to our team so they can explain those details, and we'll be available for questions at the end of the presentation. So Emily, I think Cameron's gonna lead off with the background, so I'm going to hand it over to Cameron Phillips.
Thanks so much, Connie. Thanks for prefacing that kind of overall goal of this program. I want to mirror Connie's sentiments and just express our excitement to be here and to be able to share kind of the progress on this program over the last few years. Can you go to the agenda slide? Thank you, Emily. So I'm going to be providing some background on the TDM program and some reasoning for why we're updating the ordinance now. Then Emily's going to go into what exactly the ordinance does and an overview of its different functions and components. Then she'll cover next steps, including where we are in the process, and we'll finish up with some time for Q&A at the end. Next slide, please. So let's start with the sort of basic definition of transportation demand management so that we're all on the same page. TDM refers to strategies that influence travel behavior and accommodate growing demands on our transportation system. The word strategies can be very broad and they can vary from city to city depending on the priorities in the city. But in Los Angeles, we're looking specifically at strategies that reduce car travel and drive alone trips, as Connie alluded to. Next slide, please. These are some examples of typical TDM strategies. They range from things like carpool, that's one that's been around since the existing 1993 ordinance, also telecommuting, which of course we're doing now, to things like subsidizing transit passes and bike share through work and home so that people have options besides driving as they're deciding how to get around. In the TDM ordinance that we're presenting today, we have over 40 strategies that developers can select from. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little about some of the sustainability milestones that have led to this opportunity to update the ordinance. The first ordinance was adopted in 1993, and it featured a very limited set of TDM strategies such as bulletin boards, kiosks, and bike parking. Since 1993, of course, our transportation options have improved and the technology has become more sophisticated. The Metro rail system, for example, is much more comprehensive and continues to expand. And we have bike share, scooters, and apps with real-time travel information. The city's environmental goals and state law took a real shift in 2013. That's when State Bill 743 required cities to shift their environmental analysis from a focus on traffic delay or level of service to a measurement called vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, which instead focuses on the distances people travel in cars. Reducing VMT leads to improved air quality and public health outcomes, and ultimately to a more sustainable region. In 2016, Los Angeles started the technical work to transition to VMT, and we actually started to develop our TDM ordinance at the same time in order to keep our policies consistent. We completed the adoption to VMT in 2019, and now we're here today to finish up the TDM update. Next slide, please. So this is an overview of our outreach to date. As I mentioned, we started planning to transition to VMT in 2016. We did some combined outreach on VMT and TDM with the neighborhood council alliances, some of the business groups, and an advisory committee. And that lasted from late 2017 through 2019. In 2020 and currently, we're working on getting the TDM ordinance ready for public review. We released an informational video at the end of 2020, a fact sheet, and most recently we released our draft documents and held webinars and office hours. And we're currently making the rounds to some of the neighborhood council alliances and to different stakeholders. Next slide, please. And I'll go briefly over some of the program objectives, starting with, of course, reducing VMT and drive alone trips. That's sort of our first priority. Also promoting sustainable options that leverage new technologies, providing public benefits such as reducing greenhouse gases and improving air quality. And lastly, to create a simple and flexible compliance process that's easy for developers to understand and implement using online supportive tools like the TDM calculator that Emily will describe in a little bit. So now I'll hand it over to my colleague Emily to go over program details and next steps. Thank you.
Thanks, Cameron. So there are three main components to this update. I want to start with kind of the framework for what's contained in what we have available for you to provide comments on, and what we will be taking forward for decision makers to look at. So these three main components: there's an ordinance, which will amend the part of the zoning code where TDM exists today. And that ordinance establishes the legal framework and applicability and enforcement mechanisms for the program. And then there's also a program guidelines document that will contain details about program administration and the TDM strategies that are available. This document lives outside the zoning code, so it can be updated a little bit more frequently than the ordinance. For instance, as technology changes and new TDM strategies become available, we'll be able to include them in the list of strategy options. And then in addition, our colleagues at the LA Department of Transportation, and we have David Summers with us here today. So the LA DOT, in collaboration with the nonprofit organization Hack for LA, are developing a tool called the TDM calculator. And this is an online tool that will provide a simple process for entering project information, understanding the TDM requirements, and selecting TDM strategies. So all three of these components are, there are drafts available for public review and comment right now. They're on our planning website, and we'll be sure to put a link in the chat for you so that you can access it directly. And it's also on one of our final slides here. So this proposed TDM program will expand the number of projects that TDM applies to in the city. So it will apply to both commercial or non-residential projects, as well as residential developments that are new construction or substantial additions that exceed some minimum size thresholds. And I'll show you those thresholds in just a minute. It will not, however, apply to changes of use or adaptive reuse projects where someone's reusing an existing building. It also won't apply to smaller residential projects, including small multifamily buildings and single family homes. But in the cases where a project does hit those minimum size thresholds, then that project will be required to incorporate strategies that reduce vehicle trips. The structure of the program is such that requirements correspond to the scale of a new development or a major addition, so that larger projects are required to implement more TDM strategies and smaller scale projects will be required to do less. And this is accomplished using a point system. So there's a menu of strategies, a menu of more than 40 TDM strategies. Each one has a point value based on how effective it is at reducing VMT and drive alone trips. And then a proposed development project would be assigned a point target based on the size of the project and the amount of parking it provides. And then the project would select several TDM strategies from the menu to add up to its point target. And this TDM program is proposed to be a ministerial process in which TDM plans would be reviewed and approved by LADOT, the Department of Transportation. And then this part about the feedback loop is that LADOT will monitor and evaluate the TDM strategies and their success over time, and will have the ability to make some adjustments in the future based on how effective they really prove to be at reducing VMT when implemented by projects in Los Angeles. So here's just a quick comparison between today's TDM ordinance and the proposed TDM program. The updated program will apply to more projects, both commercial, non-residential projects and residential development of at least 16 units. And will have different size thresholds depending on the specific use. As far as strategies go, instead of today's ordinance, which has prescriptive requirements that require projects to implement between 1 and 6 particular TDM strategies, the update increases flexibility by offering this menu of more than 40 TDM strategies. And then in terms of monitoring and enforcement, today a covenant records a project's TDM plan. That will continue in the proposed program, but also be expanded into a stronger monitoring and evaluation component that includes some annual reporting requirements. So here are the types of projects that the new TDM program will apply to. They include commercial projects, employment, office, retail, warehouse and industrial uses, and hotels, as well as residential projects. The 3 project levels you see here, level 1, 2, and 3, correspond to the size of the new development or of a major addition that would be subject to the TDM program. So again, the level 1 projects, the smallest developments will have the fewest requirements, and larger projects, which meet the thresholds shown under level 2 or level 3, will be required to select more TDM strategies from the menu and will have more reporting and monitoring requirements. In the updated TDM program, projects will be assigned to that point target and will need to select enough TDM strategies to add up to meet that target. And the point target is based on the project level, 1, 2, or 3, as well as whether the project is building extra parking above and beyond what the city requires. So the combination of the level and the amount of parking determines the project's point target within those ranges that you see listed on that second line there. So the proposed TDM program doesn't change the existing city parking requirements or restrict how much parking can be built. It doesn't change any requirements for more or less parking, but instead it just requires that projects that are adding more parking, their point targets will be higher, right? And so they will also have to add more sustainable transportation options. Conversely, projects that use some existing incentives to reduce parking can earn some points in the menu. So here is a broad list of TDM strategies. As you can see, they range from including affordable housing units in a project or developing a project that has a mix of uses to sponsoring or subsidizing or promoting telecommuting programs, increasing access to transit, bike, pedestrian infrastructure, and shared micromobility options like scooters. So there's a wide range of things that can apply to various types of projects, from an office building to multifamily to a hotel. And there's also this possibility of a user-defined strategy, so that an applicant can propose a strategy that's not currently in the TDM menu. And again, the menu can be updated over time. So within each of those broad categories, there are the specific strategies, again, more than 40 of them. And we're showing just a few here on the slide as examples. We've kind of divided them into programmatic strategies, which are services or incentives provided by the building owner or manager or the employer that's leasing a building. And again, these include things like telecommuting, subsidized car share memberships, or offering parking cash out, which is money instead of using the parking space that maybe an employer might provide. Others are physical strategies, which are actually built into the project or the surrounding area. So these include things like bike parking, transit displays, and things like accessibility improvements like mid-block crossings. Each strategy is worth between 1 and 15 points, and the point value is based on data about the strategy's effectiveness in reducing vehicle miles traveled and drive alone trips. So just as an example, subsidizing transit passes is worth a large number of points. That's a really effective thing to do, while installing wayfinding and transit displays, while also effective TDM strategies, are worth fewer points. Some strategies, such as running a neighborhood shuttle, are worth more points if they're open to the public versus if they only serve occupants of the building. But both of those are options for a developer to choose between. So I want to quickly show the TDM calculator just as a little demo of how it works. this online calculator will help developers get through the process. So just a little bit of basic project information is entered, and then the developer would provide the use and the scale of the project, which informs the project level. Again, that's level 1, 2, or 3. Next, the developer inputs how much parking they propose to provide, and the TDM calculator then has enough information to provide the total target points based on both the project's use and size and the amount of parking. The calculator includes the full menu of TDM strategies with their corresponding point values. And so the developer can use this as the menu to select a combination of strategies that make sense for their project and to earn enough points to add up to their point target once they've selected enough strategies. And then with all of that information, the calculator produces kind of a summary report of the TDM requirements and selected strategies. And this can actually be submitted as part of the documentation to the city, and would be, and then as part of the TDM plan, LADOT would review and verify that TDM plan for the development. So that is how the program is proposed to work, and the thresholds and regulations. So as far as where we're at right now and where we're going, we, as Cameron mentioned earlier, we put out an informational video early this year, and then the draft of the ordinance and program guidelines and calculator in June. Then we held a couple online webinars and office hours, and now we're meeting with some of the neighborhood council alliances and some other interested groups, and fielding emails and phone calls, any kind of questions that people want to send us, and compiling the comments we get, and looking at whether we'll make any revisions to the draft documents before we head to a public hearing, an information session and public hearing in a few months. After that, we'll go through the formal adoption process with a city planning commission hearing, the council committees, and a full city council consideration of the proposal. So we are accepting comments now. Of course, we accept comments all the way up until the final city council vote, but appreciate the opportunity to be here today and get to hear from you now. Earlier in the process, the more we can consider the comments and questions that you have. So this is our project team. Those of us here today are myself, Emily, Cameron, Connie, and David Summers at LADOT. But this is a really collaborative team, so credit to everyone, including the team at Hack for LA, which has been working really hard on the calculator with us. At the bottom of this slide is our website, and I see that Cameron, thank you, also just dropped it into the chat, and so you can access our draft documents there. And I think that wraps up the presentation. So we are happy to take your questions and comments.
Great, thank you so much. Emily, can you stop sharing your screen?
Yep.
Great, thank you. I like it when everybody can see everybody. I see
Absolutely.
a couple of hands raised. So yeah, folks, just go ahead and raise your hands, you know, virtually, and I'll call on you and we can chat with these folks. So the first person is a caller. Last four digits are 5671. Please go ahead with your comment or question. Okay, that person is not responding, so I'm going to go to the next person on the list, which is John and Michelle. Please go ahead with your comment or question.
Thank you very much. You can hear?
Hear you great.
Excellent, excellent. We have a project that's been underway for the past five and a half years, and it's coming to kind of a culmination where they are about ready to get their certificate of occupancy. what we have is a situation with parking. There are 61 units that were built. These are 3-story townhomes. They have common walls, etc. The original number that was given was 2 parking spaces per unit. And what we have seen is the parking surrounding the project on a couple feeder streets is horrendous. There are signs that were put out that says no parking, period, for the whole street, but there's 30 cars parked. We stopped parking enforcement one day, a little bit over a week and a half ago, and a very nice lady informed us that this project has a pass on it for parking. In other words, they allow the parking no matter what. Until that pass is removed, she can't ticket those cars. In addition to that, it is in a transit zone. It's half a block to the major streets, Roscoe, Reseda. One of the key points that we're trying to make here is that not only is the parking causing a problem externally, but internally they have buildings that are separated and the fire lanes are not marked. And right now they have cars parked all the way through there. My property abuts that. There's a 10-foot easement there. It's roughly 5 feet now. The problem, the concern we have is that all along, everybody was complaining about the number of cars that'll be parked there. The units are not using their garages for parking cars. They have ADUs, et cetera, that they put together. But the real problem, besides that parking, is the fact that the spacing between the units are being taken up so that there's maybe 10 feet between cars parked on both sides in the fire lane, that if there is indeed a fire in these units, that not only will they probably not be able to get the fire trucks back there, but the surrounding homes adjacent and a school that's adjacent to it will have serious safety problems.
And they have trash cans too for trash can collection. And also, this is Michelle, and they have a problem with the trash can. And also they're gonna build in front of these small lot homes, they're gonna build 79 more units, 4-story. And that's just sitting there with a big hole in the ground. And we don't know how many parking spaces. So that's coming very soon in front of these. So it's a big mess. And there's homeless people parked in big trucks on Reseda Boulevard, right by the bus stops and everything. So there's a big mess around here.
I'm gonna interrupt because I have, forgive me if I missed it, but I have not gotten the connection between this and the TDM program. So if you could connect it to that, that would be super helpful.
Sure. Because we're in a transit district. These were built for transit zone. And so the people are not utilizing, you were talking about how the parking and the people, we want the people to use the buses. They're not using buses. This project was started 5 years ago. It's being finished up. It's affecting the parking, and it's going to affect the buses, and it's going to affect the people are not, they're not using, they're using their cars. Okay, you're talking about keep making sure that the people are parking, are not parking and have enough parking and be able to use bus transit, because it is a designated transit zone, this development. It's called the Meritage Homes Project. So if you look on ZMS, you can see it is in a transit zone. So there's a lot of problems with it.
Any suggestions how we can possibly affect this? We've already asked DOT, police department. We've gone to building and safety, and they all just kind of shrugged their shoulders. Thank you.
Emily or anybody, do you folks you want to respond?
Yeah, I can start. So the proposed, I guess, for specifically related to this project that you're talking about, the proposed TDM ordinance will not apply. It won't apply retroactively to projects that are already certainly under construction. It won't apply to projects that have already been permitted. And so this this program doesn't offer any solutions for you on this particular project. But for other similar projects in the future, again, the TDM program as proposed doesn't change the amount of parking required in a development, but does require those developments to provide additional incentives. So in this case, you're in a transit area, maybe served well by transit, but as you're noting, lots of people still have cars and have need places to park those cars. But in addition to the transit just existing there, this TDM program would require the developer to increase the incentives for people to actually use the transit or use other modes of transportation. So again, some of those possible TDM strategies include subsidizing transit passes and enhancing the connections between a development and the transit, or putting up real-time arrival information inside the building so that it's more obvious and accessible to use transit. So those are the kinds of things that this program is trying to enhance, the connections between a new development and the various transportation options that are not individual cars.
But the 79 units are not built yet. They changed a new person's going to be building, a new developer is going to build. So they're not even building the 79 units. And friends, there's 140 units. And the second section hasn't even been built yet. So that's what, it's going to be a mess,
Okay, yeah, understood. The timing would depend on when they had received their permits, but I appreciate that the project is not completed yet. Connie, did you want to say something?
Yeah, no, Emily, you had it exactly right. So one of the reasons that we have made improvements or proposed improvements to the transportation demand ordinance that is in front of you today is really to address projects that you're giving us an example. So while the new ordinance won't apply to that project, I think if you would like to follow up with us and give us a little bit more information, we can put you in contact with the project planner, because it sounds like there could be some conditions that were possibly not being met. So we can certainly look into that for you. But however, the ordinance that we're proposing would apply to new residential development of a larger scale, whereas today it does not. So those are some of the improvements that we're trying to introduce and propose here.
Thank you. So your email is on the chat?
Sure, you can, I'll put my email in and you can send an email to me directly.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Tom, you are up next.
Hi, Dr. Donald Williams from LA 32 Neighborhood Council, also participating right now in the scoping for the Buena Vista project site. So we're kind of interested in the TDM as it will be applied. So will the TDM, whenever it is approved, apply to those projects which have not received occupancy permit or building permits, or at what level, such as if the EIR has been certified by the city council, will they be exempt from applying VMT and or the TDM? That's one question. Then the second question is, how does this relate to the previous thoughts regarding congestion pricing in the downtown LA area? So we would like to know about that. There's also a matter that there's an update of the CAST program right now, Cornfields Arroyo Seco specific plan. And will the TDM be applied to the CAST? Because CAST started the concept of detaching the dwellings from the parking. That they didn't have to have parking for dwellings in order to encourage TDM. So 3 questions, that's all.
All right. I'll start at least with the first one. In terms of timing, I would point you to take a look for yourself at the draft language in the ordinance. That's where we've written in some grandfathering language. So we can get you the link to that. But generally what it says is that with a 6-month phase-in period for level 2 and 3 projects and a 1-year phase-in period for level 1 projects, that the TDM ordinance would apply to projects which have not yet received a building permit. And then for projects that are working through an EIR, if the draft EIR has already been published, then those would not be subject to the updated TDM program. So, but I would direct you to the draft ordinance for the exact language. And then I think, David, do you want to take the second question? We'll just go in order.
Yeah, sure, Emily. The second question involved a hypothetical, I guess, scenario that congestion pricing is implemented, meaning that people will pay a cost to either access certain streets or cordons or areas if they're driving. And there's various, I think, Metro is currently exploring various scenarios under which that could be happening. So essentially, I mean, I think what we could contribute here is that these programs would be very synergistic if any kind of congestion pricing program in downtown would ever come to pass. That would be more of an area-wide incentive versus the TDM program are specific incentives that are targeted to occupants of the newly constructed development projects. So those folks would have access to, say, like, and it would be very complementary in a sense that if driving were to incur, additional cost, taking transit or other modes of transportation, even a shared vehicle, would be essentially a discount or available benefit. So it's really changing the incentive structure overall on how people currently experience and make decisions on how to get from point A to B. So those things would all factor. I think one of the things that is being conceived is that transit, for instance, transit passes would be available to on-site occupants for a much reduced cost or potentially no cost to the occupants. And then in their calculus, they're thinking, well, transit's free and available, and if driving now is going to be having some sort of price associated with that, those programs can be synergistic in a sense, but it's not contingent upon congestion pricing, I think, for these incentives to work. So congestion pricing it's not that congestion pricing has to come to pass for these incentives still to have effect, and they've been proven to have effectiveness in areas that are very much like LA today, and studies that are drawn from at least commercial office places that currently have some sort of TDM requirement due to maybe another reason, like they have to abide by air quality management district permits and regulations. So the program is certainly independent, can operate independent, but it would be certainly synergistic. And then there was the third part of that question that maybe on the Cornfield Arroyo specific plan, I think on the TDM requirements there, I think.
Yeah, I think maybe I can jump in. I think what you're getting at, or what the question was getting at, is how would the point system apply in a plan where the parking requirements are detached from the uses or are different from other locations in the city. the way the point system is structured, we are looking at generalized citywide parking requirements. And so the individual differences in parking requirements in different specific plans or different areas of the city don't play into how the points are calculated in the TDM program. And if you have follow-up questions about that, maybe you can shoot us an email or we can, or say in the chat, and we can follow up with you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Glenn is up next.
Okay, thank you. So I put into chat, and I'm not sure if it was seen or not. The first question, the question is there a city planning case number associated with this effort yet? And if so, can that be put into the chat? And also the initial public hearing that was mentioned that I understood to be held in the fall, is there any more of a time frame estimate of, like what month or, that you're looking at there? And then I just wanted to make a comment for your consideration. I think I'm arguing for flexibility, and I just wanted to give you one example and one hypothetical. The requirements or the incentives for certain densities and affordable housing along transit lines doesn't seem to make a distinction with regards to the capacity or the ability of that transit line to serve the public. And I just want to give you an example that the densification around the orange line, the bus line in the valley, now the G line, before the pandemic, it was standing room only during peak hours. And yet that's being pointed to as the transit service that justifies high density development along this bus line. Now, it is proposed to be converted to light rail, but not until 2055 at the earliest. So for 35 years of increasing density along a bus line with inadequate capacity, again, before the pandemic, we'll see what happens. That's not serving the public. That's totally different than say the subway that has a greater capacity and more, et cetera. Then in terms of a hypothetical, the city currently has requirements for bicycle parking incentives, which is great. But the demand for that bicycle parking is going to vary depending on, say, the different parts of the city in terms of, the demographics, but also in terms of the conditions out on the road, how user-friendly they are for bicyclists, and also, is there a major university that draws thousands and thousands of cyclists? So my request is that you consider some flexibility in the provisions. So let's say down the road, there's not enough bicycle parking in certain areas because of the conditions in that area. And it makes more sense then that to have an inducement. And again, I don't know how you can't read, 20 years in the future now, but that some sort of flexibility or inducement to be able to convert some of the vehicle parking spaces that maybe aren't needed to, say, more bicycle parking for those particular areas where that there's a need for that. So if you can comment on any of that, that would be appreciated. Thanks.
Yeah, I'd be happy to take the response to that. So thank you, Glenn, for that excellent suggestion on flexibility. That's very much in line with how the ordinance has been set up. So Emily and Cameron described the multiple strategies. So I think that shows you some of the flexibility that we're looking at. Additionally, in the provisions for administration and monitoring, there is the ability for a property owner to come back and change some of the provisions if indeed something like you described, conditions change and one strategy is proving not to work, they could come back and alter their agreement to make a strategy that it would be more conducive to our goals, would be allowed to be substituted. So thank you for that suggestion, and just wanted to point out there is some built-in flexibility with someone coming back to the city to ask for that change to their TDM plan. The other part, I think you asked about the public hearing date. So no date has been scheduled thus far, so you can sign up to be alerted to the date. So we're going to put the case number. Oh, I see it's Emily has placed it in there. It's in the chat. You can sign up to be notified of future meetings or dates or changes. So if we make some revisions to the proposed ordinance, you can get an email about our next steps. But we don't have a scheduled public hearing date, but we are aiming for some time in the fall.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Aurora, you are up next.
Hi, good evening to everyone. A special thank you to Lisa Hart, who came to I'm from Pico Union Neighborhood Council. And you came and gave us a talk on the EV, and I've been an EV driver for over 10 years. So I'm here, I'm very interested in what's happening. If some of you don't know where Pico Union, it is one of the densest, most populated areas right west of downtown LA, Staples Center. So I'm going to make some suggestions and make some comments. Really, human nature is you're going to drive, you're going to be late, you're going to be hitting the car. I don't think that these TDM and VMTs, I've been involved with certain developments because we have a lot of developments right now happening in the Pico Union area. And you really have to know the community and really listen to the community because they know what's going on. And in certain, some of the developments been happening on, we've spoken about this, and planning, city planning, just totally ignored what the people were saying. But anyways, that's a comment that you really need to go out there and study the area more, because you'll find out that the TDM is idealistic with the VTM, and somehow they kind of maneuver and work it around so that the project can go ahead and doesn't matter what happens to within the community. So that's a big issue with Pico Union right now. We've got, I don't know how many, we've been listening to 4 development land use, and it's basically the same thing. Oh, you're not going to have a problem with the traffic because we've done these TDMs, we're doing this, that, giving passes to our employees, telling them to use the bus, telling them to use a bike, but they don't do it. And we've already seen it in one of the developments, just as I believe Mr. Bales was saying. But my comment would be really what you need to do in the future. I don't know how, this is to make dense cities like downtown LA more walkable. And in Europe, they charge you when you hit the pocketbook of people. That's the only way they will stop from using their cars. You just say, look, I want to drive your car. It's going to be $25 to go, and make some areas that are pedestrian friendly only. So there's no choice. They have to either pay or they have to monitor, they have to change their behavior, because without doing that, no matter what you say, what you end doing with, the manage what you offer, it's still very difficult to change human nature or the human behavior pattern that we've evolved in the last, since the car came in. So everybody says it, this is a car society. They love cars, they love this. So it's going to be very difficult to get something unless you really hit the pocketbook, like I said, and you charge more to come into the city and make them use the public transportation. And I know that there are some cities that have, a lot of cities, the smaller ones, not the large ones, they do have trolley service or bus service. You park your car outside the city, and then at least you're not congesting the city and causing more smog. You pay and then you take a trolley, and that's the only kind of traffic that goes into the city. So that's a suggestion. Like I said, it's been working in Europe. France has it, England has, you pay a higher amount to drive your car, and it does help. That's just what I wanted to say. And I think it's my own experiences has been that of, we've gone to the city planning meetings, and in the end, like I said, we say, look, we know our community that it's going to be that intersection is completely congested. You're adding so much more. It's just going to ruin the residential streets. And nobody paid attention. They just said, oh no, well, it's already been approved because of the TDM. And this is what we're offering. So to me, that, and I am speaking to the resident because I live near some of these, as not from the neighborhood council board, because of course their views may differ, but this is just my own personal comments of what I've been involved with some of the developments really near my home. And, it's been a problem, and we're already having construction problems with the big trucks coming down our street when there's there's signs all over, nothing over 6,000 pounds, but you've got these huge trailers coming down the streets. They're coming in early at 5 a.m. The neighbors are complaining, and it's been a problem. So these are things that you have to look at once you, once you've done okay the development, additional stuff with the construction that can last up to 5 years. And that's not really being looked at as much as it should. I mean, I've seen studies on them, but in the end, we always say, that's not how it usually works. You contract all these developers contract all these truck drivers. They're all from different places, and they don't know. I constantly have to call in and say, there's another truck coming down the street. Can you tell them? Oh, yeah. That's what they tell me. Well, he might not be the same company reason. We'll let him know, but it's a problem. So I just wanted to at least give that feedback for you. I hope you could take it to heart that there are going to be some problems. And my suggestion, like I said, in the future is to just charge more to come into the city, charge more for parking, charge more. Boston does that. You have to pay $50 to come into the city to drive your car. So I think something like that would be ideal, would be better if you want to get people out of their cars and using public transportation. That's it.
Thank you, Aurora. I'd love to hear the response from either David or the city planning folks on that.
Yeah, I could try to take that one. Yeah, thank you for your comment. It's certainly, I completely understand. It is hard to change behavior. I don't think there's any doubt that on our behalf, I think that a lot of the strategies that we're talking about in the ordinance are designed specifically to focus on economic incentives that people make to driving. And this is still really not widely observed because the ordinance hasn't been adopted yet. So a lot of these strategies aren't currently applying to the buildings that you see. But you also made a really good point just in terms of what may be happening in local conditions and operational conditions that are very what you see from the development project. It's like in terms of like how people are accessing driveways, or you brought up a lot of points about goods movement, and DOT is still focused on those operational issues. The TDM, evaluating VMT is just one side of the equation, but we are still focused on operational analysis. If a project is going to be looking at adding, a number of cars to a specific area, we're still going to be looking at the positions of the driveways. Is that they're going to be encouraging unsafe turns, making sure that some of our programs that look at reducing fatalities and collisions through proper engineering and design are also have their eyes on some of the site plans. So there's sort of multiple angles that we're looking at development review. And so I wouldn't want to leave the impression that we think of TDM as just like kind of the silver bullet that's going to solve everything. It could do a lot if everybody's contributing to it, right? If every new project that we're seeing has incentives and structures in place that make transit super easy, and making driving maybe not the first default thing. Like people have to now pay for their parking space separate from their unit. And now that's a choice. It's like, oh, am I still gonna warehouse like an extra car? Or, are things relatively close to me that I can do without it? Today, people aren't making that decision. It's sort of a default. Like parking is just part of the unit, and they don't get to like disentangle those choices. So it's just one aspect, but it could be a very powerful aspect of motivating behavior change through those incentives. We're still going to look at the operational issues. I totally understand if you feel like there's certain aspects of that review that may not have been daylighted with sufficient attention. And if there's more feedback that I could gather on that about those specific circumstances, I'd be happy to and route those to some of our development review staff, because we're always looking to improve the process. But yeah, that's one thing I just wanted to impart, that TDM is just one component of our review process. We're going to be addressing many of these things going forward.
Thank you, David. I also wanted to mention, like you said, that that the review isn't a year. I think it should be, done almost immediately. It should be quicker, not wait a year to see whether they're implementing the TDM strategies. Because that, that's what I heard, an annual review of whether it's working or not. I think you need to really give it I don't know, let the beginning be more on top of it. And then, slowly go into progression of maybe 4 months, maybe 6 months, if you see that it's working. I think something like that needs to be, because there's really no way to enforce that the developer or whoever is in the building or the apartments is really doing that.
I appreciate that comment, Aurora. We'll definitely take that into consideration in terms of monitoring frequency. But we will be following up and confirming that these things are in place, and that's going to be a committed part of the program going forward. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to call on Eric, and then I'm going to call on Rosalind because she cannot raise her hand because she's a co-host. And then I'll call on Amy and Joan, and then we will wrap it up, I hope, and move on to our next topic. So Eric, go for it.
Hi, I'm Eric. I live in Silver Lake and I work in East Hollywood. I just want to thank everyone who brought this together. So I'll be brief. I just want to talk on two things. And the first one is the TDM proposal of subsidized transit pass. So I feel that subsidized transit pass puts the onus of getting the message out on the employer. There's low participation because that takes a lot of effort and a lot of clerical accounting and keeping. Why can't planning, Department of Transportation, and so many other of the groups that are represented here, why can't they all come together and put a draft, a proposal that all transit is free? This would also this would increase ridership, and it would reduce the injustice of going after people for fare jumping. So that's one ask. Why can't everyone get together, put a proposal, and demand that a universal program of free transit be adopted by the city? Second one is, to Aurora's point about cities in Europe. Are there any cities in Europe that you're trying to model us after or point us to? And finally, I'll just say this about changing behavior. So I work as a therapist, and actually behavior changes quite quickly if there's an incentive. So I prefer carrots over sticks. So I hope we can really also, and perhaps this will happen, discuss more about incentives to change this behavior, because behavior is actually pretty easy to change if there's an incentive. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Those are great comments. There are proposals at Metro to be at least looking at fareless transit. Metro isn't under the purview of the city, but LADOT does have the dash buses. So your comments are well taken. And in terms of behavior change and preferring carrots over sticks, appreciate that as well. A lot of the strategies in the menu of strategies are those types of carrots. So, incentives to carpool, incentives to not drive because you can get money if you don't need that parking space. Incentives like your transit is paid for, although that circles back to your comment about transit just being free in the first place. So yeah, thank you for those comments.
All right, Rosalind, go for it.
Yeah, a few comments and a question. First, I wanted to kind of speak to some ideas that I had in terms of the bigger picture of sustainability, engagement, and accessibility. And one of those is that the language of this should be linked to why we're doing this, which is about climate change, pollution, issues like that, not just congestion. And so it'd be really great to see this linked to LA's Green New Deal, like specifically and directly in the language to talk about how it links up with goals and look at other ways to support those goals. It'd also be great to see how this can be linked with county level plans and also long-term strategies for the future and how that can be part of the specific discussion, including transit build out plans for the next couple of decades, but really deliberately talk about kind of some sort of reflexive process that goes back and forth for that when you're talking about adaptability of the project. Also in terms of engagement, there was a lot of discussion about communicating with developers, but I think there needs to be accessibility for neighborhood councils, for citizens, when we're looking at, okay, so what's this upcoming project? How is it linked with the transportation demand management program? What are they doing? How accessible is it? How easy is it for people to see what developers are planning and doing? And how can we easily find out about that and have it be as open and accessible as possible? Also, I think that it would be really interesting to consider some other things like job strategies and job development strategies, and how well are developments linking to jobs that will be either in the building if it's mixed use or near the building, so that that's part of your decreasing transportation demand, is really trying to figure out creative ways to strategize proximity to where people work so that there's less incentive to use cars and more incentive to use public transport. And finally, I just had a question about cumulative impact. So, you know, you were talking about individual developments and this development, that development, that development, this size, that size, whatever. But what about looking at the overall impact of multiple developments going on within a region, areas that might be connected by transit corridors, so that, you know, if you have one big development where, okay, so they're doing these things for the transportation demand program, but you have another one that's doing less or not at all. Do they impact each other? Or is there a cumulative impact if they're all getting a lot of concessions and they're not doing as much as they could do for whatever reasons? So I'd really like to know if you've thought about that particular issue. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate those comments. Certainly this is connected to the goals and objectives of the Green New Deal, and you know, maybe we made our presentation a little too short in the interest of time today, but thank you for bringing it up and highlighting that for everyone. Absolutely, this is in alignment with the Green New Deal as well as the city's mobility plan. I want to maybe speak to your last point about cumulative impacts and the association between different development projects. One of the strategies in the menu that I didn't speak about in the presentation is the establishment of a transportation management organization. The shorthand is TMO. So one strategy is establish a new TMO, and another strategy is that a project could select is join an existing TMO. And I think, you know, not every project will select that, but it is something that we want to incentivize. That is a great way to create this coordination between multiple projects generally in a geographic area, so that they can build off each other's strategies and share in the strategies that work really well at a slightly larger scale. So that's not maybe a whole answer to your question or comment, but I did want to highlight that point as I think it's related. Thank you.
Yeah, Rosalind, thank you for your comments. Again, just adding to Emily's response, and I want to leave enough time for the rest of the questions to come in, but if you haven't had a chance to take a look at the ordinance, the intent statements of the ordinance do tie back to climate change and adaptation, as well as more clearly outline the sustainability goals. So we'd invite you to take a look at that to see if that meets some of what you're suggesting. Because again, I as a policy person really appreciate your suggestion. I think it's very important for our ordinances to lay out why they're trying to achieve their objectives and what those objectives are clearly. The other part of your suggestion about coming back to neighborhood councils for training, I think is also another excellent suggestion that we can look into how we ensure that that follow-up continues. And I think there's also a related question about people not getting enough time with the ordinance. So we have been deliberately not rushing to public hearing or to the adoption process. So we will and have been taking comments. So we invite you to take a look at our website and the materials, the fact sheets that try to explain in very simplified terms what the ordinance does and how it works. And we would continue to take your suggestions and your comments before we schedule a hearing. So just wanted to give people the information that we're not trying to rush to a hearing. We're really trying to collect comments on this. So thank you for your valuable comments this evening.
All right, Joanne.
Hi. I come to this, I'll tell you my background real quick first. I spent over 4 years as a travel trainer, getting people to ride public transportation, and that was rather recently. And I also spent 7 years on the Planning and Land Use Committee of my neighborhood council. And the word that really caused me to raise my hand was the word ministerial, because I feel that because the developers, in my experience, are mostly from somewhere else, they really don't have a handle on how they will take the formula that you're asking them to use and intelligently serve the community. I think that, if you need one more, set of points, you could put, scooters or bike racks at a senior center and check the box and say, okay, we did it. That may be an extreme example, but it may happen. And I would suggest you completely eliminate the ministerial and go to the neighborhood council and ask as part of the planning and land use support to support whatever their utilization of your program is. And because they aren't local and the neighborhood council is. And we really need to also have another, on another level, a connection to the Metro Service Council or LADOT, where they're actually looking at what is the service going to be to this new building. I used to go to the Valley Service Council, and we actually got the route of a shuttle changed because they were building a huge development in Woodland Hills. And we realized that it wasn't going to be serving that development. It wasn't the developer that came. It should have been, but it was actually, it turned out that there were some bus riders in that area that cared enough to come to the Service Council and say, hey, we really need to switch this. But will that always happen? I mean, if you want to increase ridership, you need to actually make it convenient. I mean, it was car convenience that brought me to Los Angeles from New York, where I only rode the subways and buses. So what can you do to make this transit system more convenient to the places where there is density? I think you have to not just use a formula. I think you have to actually have something more integrated so that the transit system isn't something that people say, well, you know, it's really faster in my car. So, you know, I'm paying for car insurance. I may as well use my car. And that's what I fought for 4 years to get people on transit. And they enjoyed it, but they said, you know, the connections sometimes are really bad. And it's hard to figure things out, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think you need to work with Metro and LADOT on their actual bus system for that developer more than anything else. That's it. I don't know, it's a comment. I don't know if you can answer that, but you know, it's just something I would ask you to keep in mind.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that comment. I will, in response to one little piece of that, and we are certainly, so that everyone knows, taking copious notes here on everyone's comments. But to one little piece of that, as currently structured, the various strategies in the menu, not every single one of them is allowed to be used for every single type of project. And so we're hoping to avoid that, you know, scooters at a senior center kind of situation. I would invite anyone to please take a look at the list and see if we've got the kind of alignment between actual strategies and building uses right. Because we appreciate feedback on that. Thank you.
Let me ask, building on something Rosalind said and Joanne, because I committed to this in our promotion of the event, what role can neighborhood councils have in influencing plans or proposals that developers or owners make?
Lisa, in terms of the TDM plan?
Yes.
Yes, so as a ministerial program, and I want to kind of take us back to looking at that thresholds slide, where a lot of the level 1 size projects are projects that are ministerial today. They don't need to come to planning for entitlements most of the time. They're kind of on the smaller end of development. And so many of those projects are projects that today just need a building permit from Building and Safety. And so this is adding the TDM requirements on top of that, but not adding a process where they suddenly have to come through planning for an entitlement. So in that case, it's just a building permit process. LADOT will review the TDM plan as part of the building permit review. In the case of projects that where the developer is coming to a neighborhood council for input at some point in the process, you could certainly discuss with them their TDM plan and what they're proposing, and weigh in kind of in the same way that you weigh in about all aspects of the project.
Okay, thank you. We're running wildly behind as usual, so I'm going to try to wrap it up if possible. Amy, go for it.
Hi, and I apologize for not having my picture up because I just get better service if I don't have my camera on, but it's more of a comment, and I hope people can hear me. But you know, some people touched on some of this, but you know, all the incentives are great. We need to have the infrastructure of travel for people to be able to get out of their cars. People need to be able to ride bikes safely. People need to be able to get on a bus that has a dedicated bus lane so that they could get there quickly and they're not stopped by cars in the way. And people don't want to take away lanes from cars. I mean, that's, unfortunately, I walk more than I drive in my neighborhood because it is pretty walkable here, but we need to have a better infrastructure for people who aren't driving. And people just don't want to take away the streets from cars. And that's the huge problem. And if you can give incentives, but it has to be safe and it has to be convenient for people to get out of their cars. And the only time I hate LA is when I'm driving. I have no problem walking, and I've stopped taking the bus during COVID. I do enjoy taking public transportation. Right now I'm stopped, but we need to make it safe and convenient for people. And the streets need to be safer for bikes. We need more dedicated bike lanes. And if you're not working with other agencies to get all of this, then the incentives are going to kind of just go by the wayside, because you need a safe infrastructure. That's my comment. Thank you.
Anybody want to respond from planning or David?
Sure. I'll just say, thank you. Was that Amy? For your feedback. I mean, I heard you loud and clear in terms of quality of the infrastructure. And again, the TDM ordinance is certainly not in isolation. We have a number of programs at LADOT that are looking to expand access to transit, safe access to bicycle facilities that feel less stressful. We don't always have to remove travel lanes, by the way, to really expand great infrastructure. There's a lot of planning that we're doing that can look at expanding safe bicycle infrastructure. And some cases we do as well, but those are all concurrent programs, and we completely agree that they are required and complementary. And so certainly that's all part of other things that are happening concurrent to the TDM program. It also, I would just mention that the TDM ordinance is really on the heels of two initiatives that either Measure R or Measure M that have made substantial investments in transit. So the fact that transit is growing, this really just optimizes and doubles down on the region's investment in transit, as a way to ensure that it continues to be highly utilized. So, but totally understand where we are today, and there's plenty of room for improvement.
Okay, thank you, David. Carino. Where did he go?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Question is, I guess you guys looked at sort of a assessment and strategy as far as creating parks, because if you're incentivizing density, there has to be certain amenities to provide that community for the TDM. And one of the things that we've been asking in our planning and land use is, where is the nearest park? And the response is it's outside their district. And how are you guys gonna strategize, or how to get involved in looking at for the TDM you're doing? And as far as incentives for not driving a car, I don't know what kind of incentives you need as far as seeing what's happening with the whole world that's on fire. I think our carbon footprint has gone way up, and I don't know if there's any incentivized to do anything. I think that's a good reason.
So thank you for those comments, Carino. Let me see if I can try to answer. I think there are more comments. One question I did hear about the parks planning. So this TDM ordinance really doesn't focus on parks. However, it does really link up to transportation and land use planning, right? So this idea that we as a city really have to address multiple needs and multiple goals. So the citywide policy planners, some of whom are here today, we work on different parts of the planning process, not just mobility, but mobility is a key component of kind of the puzzle that is Los Angeles. So we have housing, we have transportation, and they're very much linked. We've talked a little bit, and I saw comments in the chat about jobs. So employment is also very important in how we plan the city, with linkages between housing and job centers is really important, and that's been key. We've talked a lot about metro and transit this evening, but we've really, with this ordinance, tried to focus on the connection in different ways. So not just transit, but also walking, and people mentioned that they are walkers here, but bicyclists and just even overall safety. So we are trying to incorporate in new development considerations that tie land use, housing, employment to transportation options in a better way. And that does relate a little bit back to parks. So as we see new development in the city, we have other methods that we address with park planning. So that's really rec and parks primarily. But a lot of our housing and new development is charged a fee for new park development. So it's related, although this ordinance specifically relates to transportation and transportation requirements on new development. So hopefully that answers the question a little bit. I think there was another part to that, but I really focused on the overall integration.
Just to add a little bit, don't you think we should have nature around these developments, like trees and open space, as far as?
Absolutely, yes. You're speaking again to my heart. I very much, and that's why we were very excited to come to this committee. We really see the way that transportation can relate better to nature and to open space and parks. Again, this ordinance doesn't speak primarily to those considerations or those requirements, but our policy planners here at the city are working on different ordinances that speak to open space and conservation. And I think your next speaker is going to be focused on improving biodiversity and protecting biodiversity in the city, which we very much support and have a number of related efforts happening there. So we're happy to come back in and talk about how we're supporting that. But I want to leave time for Michelle Barton to get to tell you about biodiversity. So thank you for that question. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Joan, do you have something very brief to say?
Very brief. I just wanted to, most of my suggestions and comments have already been asked and made by Aurora and Joanne and Amy and the last person. The only other thing I wanted to say, also somebody asked a question about the cities where the traffic fees, I can't remember the right expression, have been working, and one of them I can vouch for, London, which was mentioned also by Aurora. Thank you. Hope that was brief enough.
That was fantastic. Thank you, Joan. Gary, I'm going to hold off on you because we really must move on. I apologize. Thank you. I think this was a super rich conversation. I'm so happy to have had so many folks from the city here to answer all of the questions and respond to all of the suggestions. Thank you, Emily, David, Connie, and Cameron, and to be continued. And we'll look forward to see how this evolves. And now I'm going to turn it off. Yes, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Barton, who I thought we'd start at 7:30, and who has a longer presentation than we have time for her to share it. So it's going to be a little interesting, and we might need to bring her back. But Michelle is with LASAN. I actually heard her just a couple of days ago speak to the ECCEJR committee, if I got that right, the Environment Committee of the City of LA. She's doing amazing work, and I want her to be able to share it with us so we can figure out how we can engage with her. So I'm handing it over to Michelle.
Thank you, Lisa. And I will try to just power through my presentation. I can probably do it in about 15 or 20 minutes if I'm a bit selective about what I say, and that can leave a few minutes for some questions at the end.
Actually, we have not really, so that is a problem. So we probably will have to bring you back. But yes, go for it, do what you can, and we'll have you back. That's what we'll do.
Okay. All right. So thank you, Lisa, for that great introduction. As Lisa mentioned, I'm the biodiversity lead and the healthy soils lead for LA Sanitation and Environment. And I was going to kick off today's presentation by talking a little bit about our biodiversity program and then shift into our healthy soils initiatives. So first, just very quickly to introduce the topic of biodiversity in case it's new for anyone. Here in LA, we define biodiversity as the plants, animals, and ecosystems that enrich and sustain our city. And in LA County, we actually have over 4,000 species of plants and animals, over 50 of which are endangered. And there's so much biodiversity here, especially in terms of plant life, that we are actually one of 36 global biodiversity hotspots, which is really cool. But it does mean that in addition to having this incredible variety of life, that biodiversity is threatened. And there are three major threats to biodiversity: climate change, pollution, and habitat loss, all of which we are dealing with here in LA. And there are some really shocking reports that are out, like this one from IPBES, that suggests that if change doesn't happen in terms of how biodiversity is managed, we might see up to 1 million species go extinct in the next few decades. So here in LA, we are taking action to protect biodiversity, and there are goals in LA's Green New Deal that talk about this, chiefly the one shown here, the no net loss of native biodiversity goal. So to measure progress on this goal and kind of assess what the city is doing, LASAN has created a special tool called the LA City Biodiversity Index. And this index was published as part of our 2020 biodiversity report, the cover of which is shown here. And if you haven't seen it already, it is a pretty dense document, but I encourage you to check it out. The link is at the bottom of the page here, lacitysan.org/biodiversity. But our overall index has 3 themes. The first one is shown in green. It's our native species protection and enhancement theme. Then our second one is social equity considerations and biodiversity, shown in gold. And then the last one is governance and management, shown in blue. And I know this is really hard to read on this presentation, so I will touch on these categories in more detail next. So the 8 different indicators for our index are shown here, and they are habitat quality, indicator species, threats to native biodiversity, access to biodiversity, education, community action, governance, and management. So you might be sitting there wondering, what can you all at NCSA do to help us actually improve the scores on some of these metrics moving forward? So I've compiled a little list of kind of suggested actions that could actually truly help some of these metrics. So the first thing I'll talk about is metric 2.3b, which looks at the number of certified biodiversity habitats. And we'd really love to work with you to promote 2 different programs that can certify essentially any space across the city: homes, schools, workplaces. The first program I'll talk about is through the National Wildlife Federation. And the National Wildlife Federation certifies wildlife habitat as long as spaces and gardens provide cover, food, water, and places for species to raise their young. And so any place that provides these elements and commits to using sustainable practices can be certified at nwf.org/certify. And the link is here at the bottom of the page. Please do note, though, that these certifications are $20 each. The exciting news about NWF, though, is that we have actually seen a huge number of spaces in the city of LA that have been certified through this program. So in May of this year, 2021, the city of LA actually became the largest in the US to be certified by the NWF as a community wildlife habitat. And so to achieve this certification, we did some outreach with residents, schools, and organizations to really encourage them to certify their private spaces. And ultimately, Angelenos registered over 1,200 yards, schools, and other spaces. So we're really excited about this certification and the distinction that's come with it. The other program I'll mention is the Ocean Friendly Gardens program through the Surfrider Foundation. And this one has a slightly different focus, but one that I love because it actually hits a little bit more on our Healthy Soils program. And so this one looks at conservation, permeability, and retention in spaces. And one of the other things I like about this program is that unlike NWF, it is totally free to participate. So the next metric I wanted to talk about is 2.3A, community science app utilization. And NCSA members can help promote active participation in community science with different sites like iNaturalist. And while some biologists do go out into the field to do surveys in the mountains and in the oceans, it is really, really powerful to work with community scientists because the observations that the general public can make far outnumber the amount of data that we can gather as biologists. So community science data really does help researchers and scientists make decisions. But now I mentioned earlier that we have this incredible amount of biodiversity in LA. So how do we choose which species to focus on? It's a tricky question, but we have decided to focus on a set of indicator species. So we are tracking 37 species that really are found typically in our higher quality natural areas. And these are places that have good habitat, food, water, shelter, and just general good environmental quality. And so one of my next actions for you all is to get out into nature and upload some observations of our various indicator species. We do have a full list on our website. It's at lacitysan.org/biodiversity, and it has the names of each species as well as a picture to get you started. There's also a lot of really great information that can be found on the iNaturalist website about each of these species if you're curious what types of habitats and ecosystems to go looking for some of these species in. So next, I'll just quickly run through a couple of species that are on our indicator species list. First up, this is the California quail. It's a really iconic ground dwelling bird. This is another one, it's the western bluebird. And I like to mention this one just because it is one that is found in a lot of our urban parks. And so it's a bit easier to see than something like the California quail. Another fantastic bird is the acorn woodpecker. They have this really bright red cap that in this photo kind of bleeds with the background, but it's really fun to see, especially in sycamore trees, oak trees, in some of our parks like Griffith Park. This slide is not a picture of something that was taken by someone on iNaturalist. This is actually a photo of a bobcat taken from a nature cam. And I put this in my presentation just because certain species like the bobcat are sometimes hard to see in person. And so some of this technology, like these camera traps, really can help us figure out where certain species are and sometimes get really great compositions like this with downtown LA in the background. The last species I'll highlight is the El Segundo blue butterfly, which is both endangered and endemic to LA. So when something's endemic, it means it's specific to just that place. So these little butterflies are really special here in LA, and they actually rely on a particular plant, the buckwheat plant shown in this photo. And those are often found in the El Segundo dunes. So shifting gears, the last metric I wanted to mention and recruit your help on is one that I think this committee will be excited about. It's metric 2.1b, neighborhood landscape and tree canopy footprint. So for this metric, really any activity, planting new ground cover, planting greenery, shrubs, and increasing the amount of LA that's considered to be green, since this is something that is measured using remote sensing, will increase the score of this metric. So, there are all sorts of opportunities here to help this score increase. And to drive that point home, street trees, understory plantings, and other green infrastructure projects can be used to create new corridors for species. And this can be done via things like smaller stepping stones or bigger wildlife crossings. So just to wrap up what's happening with biodiversity, this is just a quick summary slide that lists a couple of actions I'm suggesting that NCSA can work on to enhance and protect biodiversity here in LA. And I do have one bonus action for you. If you haven't already, I encourage you to check out a new short documentary called The Year the Earth Changed. It's really great and has some inspiring and really beautiful footage of what happened in the anthropause, the early days of the pandemic as wildlife really kind of took to the streets. So now I will transition to healthy soils. Hopefully timing wise, I still have a few minutes, Lisa, to hit on. Okay, great. All right, so in terms of healthy soils, again, looking at the Green New Deal, there are a number of goals that we are working on, namely to develop a healthy soil strategy for the city, to pilot 2 healthy soils projects, and then do some exploration for incentives and grants that can help fund this work, and of course, do some community outreach to raise the general awareness on these topics. In addition, in September 2020, Councilmember Paul Koretz introduced the Regenerate LA motion. And this motion builds on what's in the Green New Deal, but calls for some pretty specific interdepartmental collaboration on kind of some city activities and operations, ways we can increase access to mulch and compost and actually create some on city lands. There's a public awareness and outreach component, and then a component looking at green or brown jobs. And you might actually be excited to learn that this motion specifically directs us to work with the NCSA to raise public awareness around healthy soils and regenerative land management. So if we do get a chance to have a little discussion after my presentation, I'd really be interested to hear from you all on what ideas you have to do some education and engagement on this issue. All right, so we at LASAN started our Healthy Soils program just last summer, so it's a pretty new program, but we're pretty excited to be the departmental lead on this effort and promote healthy soils, regenerative agriculture, and climate resilience. But we recognized early on that we couldn't do this alone, so we are working with various partners from the public, NGO, and private sectors. And we've created an interdepartmental team with other members across the city family, a Healthy Soils advisory panel that has about 40 experts and researchers that deal with issues related to soil health. And this group has been incredibly helpful and has helped write parts of our Healthy Soil strategy document, which is coming along quite nicely, and brought up some really incredible and exciting pilot projects. The last group is the biggest green circle, and that's our stakeholders. And this is a group that I'm slowly starting to grow. So if you're interested in being part of our stakeholder group, please do reach out to me or reach out via Lisa. So as we work with our interdepartmental team, we are looking at ways to improve city activities and operations to promote the creation and use of mulch and compost. So we're doing things like researching opportunities to develop compost on public lands, looking at ways to reduce chemical and water use, specifically in our parks, using compost and mulch instead of chemical and water inputs, We're looking at opportunities to use excess mulch and green bin collection to support healthy soil. And then probably the thing I'm most excited about, looking at opportunities to unpave and repurpose underutilized city lands. And these are all really big questions that require a lot of collaboration and innovation across all departments. And we're pretty lucky to have a strong interdepartmental team thinking through these things. So just to touch on a couple of the things we've done so far in terms of raising public awareness, we have created some flyers and resources like this flyer shown here. We have also created a Healthy Soils webpage that is at lacitysan.org/healthysoils. And once it's ready, probably later this year or early next year, our strategy document will live there. We are also doing some composting workshops. These are things that used to be in person. Right now, they are still on pause due to COVID, but we have a great 4-part composting video series on YouTube that I do encourage you to check out. We are also piloting a few food waste organics pilots, the In Sync and Curb Your Food Waste pilots that are taking these organic materials, this food waste, and turning it into compost mulch, and in the case of In Sync, energy. And while these are pilots now, we're hoping that they'll expand in the future to really capture some of these organic materials and put them to beneficial reuse. And so while work remains to be done on all of these healthy soils goals, I do think that we in LA are in a pretty unique position. We are, I think, very much at the forefront of healthy soils and trying to think about this issue and how to create a more circular system with our organics materials, and are just a leader in this space. And I'll just add again that we're looking for partners to promote healthy soils. So if you'd like to be one of our stakeholders or have ideas on outreach, please do reach out. And that is actually it. Did I do okay, Lisa?
You did great. That was amazing. Thank you. There's so, gosh, there's so much to dive into. I only wish we had time to tonight. But you've whetted our appetite, and I hope you can come back if you're not camping and talk to us more. And I wanted to give Rosalind Helfand a chance to chime in because she's our representative from the Hollywood United Neighborhood Council, and she's been doing a lot of interesting stuff on biodiversity. Rosalind, can you take a couple of minutes to share some of what
I actually put together some slides too. So I will briefly show this to you, but fewer slides. So let me share my screen really quickly. You all. Right. And can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay. So just to talk a little bit about biodiversity, Michelle already covered some of the things that I was going to bring up. So that's great. And so just a little bit of background. I'm from Simi Valley, California, Chaparral area. I got active from a very young age in a lot of environmental work, and Rocky Point Natural Park is a big campaign that I worked on to protect habitat and development. And now I have a consultancy. I'm here as a representative from the Hollywood United Neighborhood Council, but Lisa asked me to talk a little bit about my work. And I consult independently on environmental policy and work with groups of people on projects like looking at environmental justice issues. So just thinking a little bit more deeply about biodiversity, I would say it's a mindset more than even just a set of actions you can take. Yes, it's about the diversity and abundance of species, but biodiversity is about everything that underlies our existence. It's about, going back. It's foundational, it's inseparable from what we are and how we live, the food we eat, the oxygen we breathe, the water we drink. We can't live without it. And that's why it's really important to consider things like the choices and actions that we make. How do they help harm, or are they neutral for biodiversity? How can we integrate that into every decision? Do we equitably share the healthy ecosystem benefits, such as affordable food, abundant and affordable water, clean air, and mitigations from disasters and heat? And do we consider the cumulative impacts of choices that we make, or are they isolated? And do we normalize biodiversity as part of the public discourse? And I really see biodiversity as something that intersects with every aspect of the work that the Neighborhood Council Sustainability Alliance does, and every committee. So from the LA's Green New Deal to electric vehicles, transportation, energy, trees, advocacy and sustainability guidelines, thinking about how biodiversity intersects with each of those is really critical. So electric vehicles, for example, are a great response to climate change, but they're highly dependent on certain kinds of batteries that are leading to heavy mining of lithium, for example. And we know for a fact now that impacts on the environment that happen in other parts of the world come home as destructiveness right here in California. And so we do actually need to think bigger, and we need leaders and leadership bodies that are willing to think about some of the bigger questions about how to make our choices as healthy for biodiversity as possible. Because biodiversity, we have climate change and biodiversity are two sides of one coin, and you can't solve one without protecting the other, or solve one without solving the issues with the other. So I'm working a lot on connecting local and global issues right now. And Lisa's attended one of the meetings that we had for that. And specifically, I'm doing a lot of work around the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, which is the world's only global treaty, umbrella treaty to protect biodiversity. And the US never became party to it, which is this big gaping hole. But this amazing thing happened in December 2020. The state of California officially became an observer to the treaty, which means we can kind of participate and help to influence the direction of really big discussions that are happening about something called the Global Biodiversity Framework, which is this giant new plan that's being developed to protect the future of all nature worldwide as equitably as possible, with this idea that we cannot survive if we don't protect biodiversity, if we don't protect the systems that enable clean water and abundant food and all of those things that we rely on. And so this thing happened in July. Draft 1 of this thing called the Global Biodiversity Framework was issued in July. And now it's up for a lot of discussion and review. And we have an opportunity to be a part of that discussion. And there's a big case for local organizations and cities participating in this discussion and telling California what we should be saying about this draft, because the pandemic, for example, is something that we're pretty certain is linked to degradation to biodiversity. And we've seen, again, how it comes to roost right at home. We've also seen how, not just heat, but also degradation of the environment is impacting our systems here in California. So we have things that we can share with the world, and we have a lot that we can learn about our practices, both in Los Angeles and statewide. And we had this amazing coalition of supporters get behind California becoming an observer, from really local organizations like the Young Entertainment Activists Local LA and Glendale Environmental Coalition and Citizens for Los Angeles Wildlife and Kiss the Ground, which is about healthy soils, to statewide organizations like the California Native Plant Society and the California League of Conservation Voters. And the city of LA got behind this too. And so this was actually originally championed by Councilmember Rue when he was the council member for District 4, but the whole city council voted to support California's participation and really noted in their vote for support the importance of subnational governments, which in the convention is defined as states and provinces, but they do have big programs for city engagement, but the importance of subnational government engagement. And this framework that's being developed, which I'm happy to share with anybody, it's pretty big. It's very much a draft with targets to 2030 and goals for 2050. And there's, in April 2022, there's going to be big negotiations about that, and California will be there. And California is looking for input from groups like the Neighborhood Council Sustainability Alliance could choose to say, hey, here are some thoughts on this. some of the topics that are being brought up for this framework are about cities and plastic waste, this whole 30 by 30 idea, and much, much more. But again, some of these are actually being hotly debated. This is not something that's set in stone. This is something that people can really contribute to right now. And this is just somebody else talking about why it's so important for cities to engage on this. So I'm actually hosting a workshop together with the California League of Conservation Voters on the 16th with an advanced information session on the 12th that anybody's invited to participate in. And we're going to talk more about this and take a look at these plans and talk about how local examples and people in communities across California might want to contribute to what California has to say. Again, we really see our state as having the ability to raise ambition for action on biodiversity. Yeah. Oh, and just one other project that I'm working on is going to be launching in September, and that's a global green recovery collaborative. So green recovery is this idea that as we invest in the economy moving out of COVID-19, that we need investments at every level from LA on up to be green and to push us forward towards becoming sustainable and addressing climate change and biodiversity loss instead of sending us back. And this photo is, it's a global team working on this project, and these are members of my team all over the world. And Mayor Garcetti has been talking quite a bit about green recovery himself. He's the chair of C40, which is a global group working on climate solutions. And so he himself has been talking about the importance of green recovery and investing in jobs that will, again, move us forward instead of backwards. So that's it for me, but I really, really kind of want to go back to this point back here. If I can get all the way back, it's catching up. There we go. This point right here. I think this is the most important thing at the moment, is that the Neighborhood Council Sustainability Alliance has this opportunity to put biodiversity at the heart of your thinking, to make it a mindset, to make it something that's intersectional, where you think about how these issues, when it comes to not just protecting, but providing opportunities for nature to thrive at every point of your work, how you can do that and how you can make that part of the conversation, or how we can do that, as I'm a member of the Neighborhood Council Sustainability Alliance. And I will close there. Thank you.
All right, thank you both. We have to move on to our committee announcements and updates. I mean, committee updates and announcements. But so I wish we could dive into this, but we will have to do that another day. But of course, folks can reach out to Michelle or Rosalind or me if you want to get in touch with them in order for us to move forward on all these things. Okay. Where are my, I'm trying to find the slides, which is always hard to find. Gosh, is it this? Oh, no, it's not. Sorry. You know what? I might do what I did last time and skip the slides because it takes me too long to find them. I will say briefly about advocacy. Oh, wait, I just found them. Okay, if I can make this a presentation, which I realize I don't know how to do in, I don't know how to do that in here, sorry. So advocacy, we're working on a bunch of things, and this is what we're working on, and please feel free to join us. We meet the first first Sunday of the month. And I'll see if I can advance the slides. I can't even do it that way. Energy, is anybody from the Energy Committee here? I think Dan is not here. Anyway, the big thing we're working on in the Energy Committee is taking something that to a city council member that will help us help the city or kind of push the city to factor in carbon emissions when they're, and the cost of those emissions when they're making decisions. That's really our big thrust right now. Transportation, Muriel, can you talk about that?
Oh, okay, yeah. So our committee did a lot with submitting project submissions to the UCLA LASAN School of Policy regarding like certain sustainable policies. Namely, Lindsay had submitted something about livable communities, and there's also some submissions about like bike lanes. Recently, Nancy did a presentation with Motion. She presented a summary of what Motion presented to our WRAC, and then another Philip Brown actually like developed a really cool presentation about the Flow Boulevard on Sunset. And then lastly, Lindsay also presented her presentation about livable communities. And if you have any questions, I'll share some emails in the chat regarding all those presentations. And that's it.
Thank you, Muriel. That was great. Joanne, can you talk about the Trees Committee, please?
Yes, we're going to meet on August 28th, which is a Saturday at 1:30. And we are going to talk somewhat about tree removal hearings at the Board of Public Works. And also, I'm inviting anyone who is interested to join with me on a new subcommittee of CFAC. The Community Forest Advisory Committee is doing an ad hoc subcommittee to review proposed tree removals. And this committee is open to the public. So you don't have to be on either the Trees Committee or CFAC to be part of this. This was actually not my doing. They asked me to do this. And actually in Santa Monica, they review tree removals at their equivalent of the Community Forest Advisory Committee. So my Zoom link will come to you if you email me at trees@ncsa.la. I'll send you a Zoom link for the meeting on August 28th. That's it.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much. I have a couple brief announcements to make. We're going to be part of the Congress of Neighborhoods, which is Saturday, September 25th. We're going to be talking about how we move to renewable energy and how that changes our lives, how that affects us. And we will still, we are thinking, hold our regular monthly meetings. I think it'll be September 12th. And it will probably be on ways, some creative models that we're seeing along the lines of community land trusts and community investment trusts that are addressing gentrification and the challenges of people who have been in the neighborhood for a long time to be able to stay in the neighborhoods that they've been in. And this has been inspired by the effort of some community members to buy the Baldwin Hills Crenshaw Plaza, which you might have heard about. It's a really exciting effort. They might not succeed, but they are doing some really cutting edge work trying to buy as a community a mall. So in order to keep investment within the community and build wealth within the community instead of having wealth leave the community. So super exciting stuff that I hope we will discuss more next month. That's all I have. Does anybody else have other announcements?
Well, yeah.
Go for it, Jan. Go for it.
Since Michelle was here, I just want to say that the biodiversity report was adopted in committee on this past week. And we're very pleased about that, very supportive. And it actually has an amendment directing that I asked for, and they heard us. Directing city departments to follow the biodiversity report so it doesn't just get put on a shelf. So good work, Michelle, and we're really looking forward to the full city council approving it and implementing it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, Joanne. That was really important and exciting. Other stuff? You can just chime in. Everybody's good? Oh, Glenn, you want to say something? Go for it.
Yeah, thanks. For those who are neighborhood council folks, but also it's open to all stakeholders, the annual, except for last year because of the pandemic, the annual neighborhood council budget day is coming back virtually this year on Saturday, August 21st, 9:30 a.m. with a plenary session with a panel. And then at 11:30, we break out into regions, the different regions for the neighborhood councils, and we discuss city services and issues. So it is important, in my opinion, to have perspectives represented in those breakout sessions to make sure that the issues discussed at these meetings are raised, such as trees, such as, just the whole broad range of topics, to make sure they're into the conversation. Those reports for each of the 7 breakout sessions then are written up, and they are help guide the work of the budget advocates when they meet with the mayor and the city departments, and then prepare their reports, and which ultimately go to the mayor and the city council before the budget for next year is released. So your ideas can get incorporated into that. And so I just want, and I'm putting into the chat the website. The registration just opened up, so you can register for it. Thank you.
Thank you. And please remember to complete the evaluation form. And any other announcements? Okay, I think we're good. Thank you folks so much. And we'll bring Michelle back and talk more about what Rosalind was raising, and to be continued. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Lisa.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Very, very interesting.
Oh, good.